I personally felt like on Friday everybody wants to go out and meet his non-poker friends. So Friday evening didn't sound like ideal to me initially, but we'll see. We can compare.
Recording in progress.
Let's get this started. So today I actually got a lot of feedback, mostly in private messages from people that were part of the previous webinars. And most of them were asking for more practical examples. So today I decided to focus mostly on that. And this is actually the best way to discuss post-flop in PKOs, because nowadays it's still not available, like all these immediate solvers and sims like the Preflop Academy one. They're mostly for vanilla, not for PKO. So maybe in a few months we will have these kind of solutions that we can instantly see the post-flop sims, but not today. So I made sure to include a lot of marked hands by myself. But first, I want to start with what was left from the previous webinars, like part 3. I wanted to show you quick 2 examples. The first one is a final table of PKO to compare a PKO versus vanilla. So let's get there. This is the final table. It's 52 blinds average stacks. And in this case, it's a little bit more deep stacked than usual, which is good because with this GG poker, for example, the blind rollback, this gets very useful. Like you start with 40 blinds effective, and when you lose 1 or 2 players, it's up to like 50. So this can be very handy. Let's see, first of all, how does the button react versus cutoff raise first in. This is the PKO version, and then we can compare to the vanilla version. So in this example, the button plays over 36% when the cutoff opens. And in this case, it's very important that the blinds are actually 2 of the shortest stacks, and it's a bounty. So the button is the chip leader and the cutoff is the second chip. So he can apply a lot of pressure, and in the same time, he can flat with a very wide range to go after the bounty of the short stacks. So in this case, we can see that he calls 20% range and then 3-bets 16.4% range. Usually that's a very rare sight, especially when we talk about vanilla. Most of the cases, you see when there is a raise first in, we play mostly 3-bet and we don't flat so much. But here actually, the button is flatting more often than he's 3-betting. So I can actually open another Preflop Academy sim on the site where I can compare instantly with the vanilla version. Let's see. Final table 8 max. So it's this one, button versus cutoff raise first in. Okay, so here it's basically the same 3-bet range percentage wise, but it's just, first of all, way less flatting, and second of all of these flats that are missing from the range, they go towards folding. So here we see 10% more folds, and it all comes from the flats. So the button in this case has way less reasons to be sticky against the cutoff, and therefore he just plays mostly 3-bet and doesn't bother playing against the cutoff so much. Then the next thing I wanted to show you, oh yeah, this is very interesting. So again, exploring buttons flatting range versus each position. So look at this suited portion of the range, like the 5-3 suited plus the gappers and the suited connectors. They actually stay pretty stable. Doesn't matter what position we are up against. It's just these are the hands that we always want to play as the big stack when we have the nut position. You see, even versus the low jack, we play them versus MP. it's pretty much the same range. So this is very unintuitive, I would say. Including me, most people just assume that when you're facing a later position range, then you want to be playing wider ranges as flats and 3-bets. But in the button shoes, we actually don't even bother with folding more often these suited hands when we cover everyone. So that's really curious. And then the next thing I wanted to show you. Okay, so how does the cutoff react versus button 3-bet? So as you can imagine, this is the biggest like bubble factor for the cutoff versus the button, because he's second in chips and there is only one guy who covers him. So he really doesn't want to bust here, but still it's a PKO. So this really matters and this changes a lot, because if the cutoff gets a double up through the button, he's in great position to ship the whole tournament. So that's why you can see that this is cutoff's 4-betting range. It's 17.2% 4-bets, and even a hand as like pocket tens or pocket jacks, it's actually strong enough to 4-bet for value here, being 78 blinds effective, cutoff versus button, and we already know how wide the button range is. So this is something that we won't see in a vanilla scenario. Let's have a look. Okay, same spot. In this example, we 4-bet jam way more, 4% compared to 0.5. And then we 4-bet 6.5% compared to 17.2. So this should already tell us about how huge the difference in our play style should be if we have the same scenario in a PKO and in a vanilla final table. It almost has nothing to do with the other example. So you can see here, ace king is not really strong enough to 4-bet induce. So cutoff rather just jam when it's not a bounty. But here he's only jamming very few low frequency ace king off, and the rest he's inducing, ace king suited he's inducing, and this generally the lower risk premium and the higher future gain. It allows him to expand his value range, induce range. So this is something crucial. I think most people don't realize about this difference. They play kind of similar. Let's see how we can compare the small blind response versus button raise first in. So this is the PKO final table. Okay, so in the PKO final table, the small blind plays about 20% here. He's the shortest stack facing the chip leader. First of all, the chip leader here plays over 70% range. First in, it doesn't have a jamming range. So there are some flats, which is curious in the small blind shoes. Let's compare this to the vanilla scenario. Okay, 0 flats. I think this is probably what most of us expected. 0 flats, and we play almost like twice as tight. Like here we play actually it's kind of similar range, but what we need to focus here is the small blind has kind of a big bounty. It's one of the biggest bounties in play, definitely above average. So in the PKO final table, he actually can induce queens plus. He even goes with ace 10 suited. And here, what I wanted to illustrate is that when you're the short stack, your strategy actually doesn't change that much. We just witnessed how the cutoff adjusts his strategy versus the chip leader, because he's second in chips and he has way higher like future game gain if he wins a big pot. But for the small blind, it's actually very similar. It doesn't really matter if you're in a PKO final table or a vanilla final table, because you only play for the pay jumps at this point. You don't really get to play for the bounty price pool. So even though the button here only raises 57% range, compared to 71, I think it was, we play a very, very similar strategy. So that's really crucial as well. And let's have another look, a multi-way spot where the small blind faces cutoff raise and button flat. Okay, so this is the vanilla final table. He has to only play about 12%. Okay, and in this one, he actually plays 15%. It's not a big difference, but he has way more flats. I think this is what should be the main difference between, in general, between PKOs and vanillas, not only on final tables, but in general. So basically, we're allowed to flat way more and we're allowed to overcall way more. Like here, it's under 1%. We can agree that this range is kind of non-existing. But here, it's actually quite significant, 5.5% overcall in the small blind as the shortest stack. So that's another main difference. And let's see what happens for the low jack. Raise first in for the low jack. So in this case, he at the PKO final table, he raises 18.3%. And actually, this is unintuitive, but in a PKO final table, usually the ranges are much wider, especially the bigger stacks. They like to play much wider ranges when they cover the big blind. But in this example, the low jack is actually playing tighter in the bounty final table compared to the vanilla final table. What is the reason for this? It's because he has the 3 stacks that cover him on his direct left. So basically, we already know these guys are going to be flatting a lot. They are going to be overcalling a lot. They're also going to be 3-betting a lot and also having wider value ranges. So his raises are not going to be so efficient as steals. So he actually prefers to be playing tighter in this scenario, even though it's a bounty final table. This was something that I was a little bit surprised to see, but then I was able to find the explanation. Let's see what the button does. This is the last thing I'm going to show you about this final table. This is the button versus cutoff and low jack. This is the PKO final table. Okay, so this might be very surprising. Actually, let me first show you the other one. Okay, so this is very self-explanatory. Here we have this range to 3-bet from the cutoff versus low jack. And then this is the range that the button has to play. It's actually under 5%. And you can see that there is no flatting. So he plays 4.5% and he doesn't flat at all. And here, he doesn't jam anything. In the previous example, he was jamming ace-king suited. Here, he's just preferring to kind of induce with a wider range. And he has a flatting range. And the reason is because he has the nut position. And also, all the ranges are wider. Like in this example, the cutoff range is weaker than in this example. And therefore, the button has a lot of hands with very nice equity and playability. And he has the extra equity because he covers extra pot odds, kind of, because he covers everyone at the table. So when he plays postflop, he gets this extra benefit from actually stacking someone. So this is another main difference between PKO and vanilla final table. We have a question here. In real life, button won't 3-bet as much as the solver. So would cutoff be better off not 4-betting with queens and jacks and just call the 3-bet? I agree that probably the button, like the general random player, won't be finding so many 3-bets as the button. versus cutoff raise first in. And we definitely have to draw the line somewhere in terms of what hands we want to induce in the cutoff shoes. I think we can just go jacks and go 4-bet with queens. I'm pretty sure that queens should be good enough given that the risk premiums are lower than a regular final table. So yeah, and also I think this most of the 3-bet, 4-bet scenarios are very player dependent. So if you see a guy at your final table, for example, he has on GG, he has like 38% VPIP. You can expect him to 3-bet pretty close to the GTO range, maybe even wider. And not only wider, I think there must be another thing to talk about here. Let's have a quick look. So in this example, this is the button 3-bet versus cutoff. Okay, so what we see here, we see a lot of hands that actually 3-bet kind of for value, but they only call versus 4-bet. And these are all the pocket pairs. These are the suited aces. And I generally am looking at a very wide value range. By value, I mean hands that don't fold versus 4-bet. So in reality, I think what's going to happen most of the time is the guys are going to hit like probably a little bit tighter frequency than these 3-bets, but their overall ranges are going to be much tighter for value. Therefore, they're going to be over bluffing. So it makes sense to have like queens as the bottom 4-bet induced hand, but also make sure to have a lot of bluffs, because I think people in general, they lack enough 3-bet calls versus no-knowing 4-bets in such situations, because they're not really used to facing a 4-bet. Like you're the chip leader, you're like, okay, so this guy must be playing very tight against me. He's just gonna call or maybe fold. But when you 4-bet, they actually end up folding way too much. So it makes sense to bluff them with a lot of 4-bets. Okay, I hope that answers your question. And just a very quick thing I wanted to show you. So it's in this scenario. Yep, this one. I want to show you the difference between the small blind strategy. This is not a final table. It's a PKO tournament, kind of early stages. In this example, we have the big blind with 22 blinds and bounty power 1.1 something. He's covered by the small blind. But what I want to show you here is how much it matters actually the margin you cover villain with. Because in this example, we see the small blind only covers the big blind by 10 big blinds. So this is his overall strategy. Open folds are generally going to be very similar. Doesn't matter how much you cover the guy with. It's a little bit expected that we're going to be folding a little bit less when we have like 90 big blinds or something. But this is not what matters. What I want to show you is how we play our range in the small blind when we cover by just a little. Because if we lose this hand, if we double the big blind up, we only cover the cutoff. And that's really bad. So in this example, we jump 13% of the range, and then about 30% we raise, and then the rest we flat. And let's have a look to another PKO final table example where it's a very similar spot. Here the big blind has a little bit less chips, just 4 big blinds less. But the main difference is that the small blind here covers him more than double. And also, if the small blind loses the hand and doubles the big blind up, he still covers more than one player at the table. I think he covers 3 of them. So that's already a big difference. So in this example, we see a very different small blind raise first in strategy. First of all, the folds are stable and the limps are stable. But what changes is half of his no-win raises kind of move to open jumps. So he's more willing to open jump more hands and to run his equity basically when he covers by a higher margin. So this is something I think it's very very unpopular for people to think about. So I wanted to show you, I found a very good example here in the solves in Preflop Academy. I wanted to share with you. And the hands are kind of natural, like we're mostly using hands that have pretty good equity when they're called, and they also accomplish some nice folds from hands that dominate us. For example, we jam Queen 3 suited, he's folding Queen 8 suited, he's folding Queen 10 off probably, or it's a break-even call. So yeah, it's a very good approach to keep this in mind. All right, and let's move to the next part of the presentation, which is gonna be the post-flop adjustment. I'm just gonna share a little bit of theory and then we move to the examples. Just 4 points to discuss. The big stack wants to bet bigger bets and at a higher frequency. This is a very general assumption for post-flop when we cover someone. The shorter stack wants to pot control more and protect his bounty. There are exceptions. The bigger stack has to be more greedy for value, and therefore the shorter stack has to be bluff catching wider on the river. So basically the variance is way higher post-flop in PKOs than in vanillas. About the first topic, I forgot to mention that this leads to more raising both out of position and in position. And also we see a lot more big overbet jumps on the river, for example. You can see in the solver length a lot more 3x, 4x pot bet jumps on the river. Both for value and for bluffs, mainly used by the big stack. He's the one who wants to play for stacks anyway. For number 2, I forgot to mention that there might be a population exploit here. I think most people make mistakes in the lack of enough big bets. They don't use big bets enough. So the pot controlling part as a covered stack comes a little bit more natural. I think we're all familiar with like the close hands. We kind of feel we should check back when we are covered, especially if it's by a big margin and we have a decent bounty. And for the third point, what I can add here is that this is very true from the small blind position for boards below jack high. We lead a lot more. Like for example, we flat a raise in the small blind, we cover the player, and we see a lot more donk bets from the small blind in PKO compared to vanilla. Like there are some spots in vanilla where we are virtually checking our entire range, especially three-way from the small blind. But the same board, we can be leading by for a very high frequency in the small blind in a PKO. So this is already a big difference between these two games. And kind of the same goes for the big blind. Like it's always like this. The shorter stack wants to be playing more passive, and therefore the big stack wants to take advantage of this passiveness and take the initiative from him, and basically start donking to build the pot. And then we get to the last point. The bigger stack, yeah, this is actually what I just explained. He can donk more boards because of number 2. And because of his wider range, he now covers more boards. So what I mentioned earlier about the boards that we don't usually lead in vanilla scenarios from the small blind, it's mostly because of board coverage issues. Like we're generally not so well connected with these boards, but in PKOs, because of how wide our range is, especially if we cover by a big margin, we can start donking some boards from the small blind. Okay, so let's move to the post-flop examples. So as I mentioned, I have used some of my own marked hands to show you guys some of the heuristics we just discussed. Some of the hands are pretty simple, but I was hoping to expand on them and to talk a little bit more about them as they come. So for example, this looks like a pretty standard spot post-flop. This guy is a regular. I don't have additional info about him, but I wanted to point out that here in a vanilla scenario, I know this is a mix between check call and check raise. But for example, I would mostly check raise in a bounty tournament because I really benefit from getting to stack this player because of the added chips. And if I don't check raise and I improve, then I risk winning some part of his stack, but not everything. So we should be basically playing more aggressive all our draws, and also slow playing is not really a thing. When we cover this guy, for example, in a vanilla scenario here, we would be almost purely check calling a hand like king 5 for balance purposes. But in a bounty tournament, I think it's best to just check raise everything strong and mix in some bluffs along with that. So yeah, I wanted to show you this example and make sure you understand that we should be playing more aggressive. Let's see the next example. So this is another one. Here I cover just the first guy. We're all regulars in this hand. And in this example, my hand is standard flat from the small blind. But what matters here is that I'm going to be having much wider range from the small blind in a PKO compared to vanilla. So with my new range, the wider version of my original range, I'm going to be covering these board textures way better. And I think the UTG guy, he's still going to be checking pretty often on these boards. So this allows me to start donking here. And having a blocker to both the spades and the diamonds also helps. And this is another example where in GPV scenario, we would be probably pure checking our entire range and starting like this. But in PKO, I think it's much better to donk here and take the initiative. So I'm not trying to be completely balanced in those spots, mostly because I think population doesn't really adjust properly. And they would, for example, fast play all their strong hands in that spot as jacks, PL, or they would just float with a little bit capped range. So this would help me big time post flop. And I think that the second reason why I like to overdo this plays is because I think they kind of get players outside of their comfort zone. So I think they're not used to really playing against this play style. And when they do, they are very likely to make mistakes. And I put myself in a position where I get a lot of experience playing this type of hands, and they don't. So I'm always going to be the more prepared in that. And this is something you should also look out for. I think this is going to be extremely powerful in mid stakes or even low stakes, because players there, they play much more honest poker. You won't see some bluff raises with a hand like king 10 off, for example, here, or king jack off with one spade. While this guy, he's a pretty good regular, so he might be finding these hands sometimes. So this was another thing I wanted to mention. This is another spot. We have discussed the bigger open sizes before in, I think, in part 2 of the webinar, when we cover from the late positions, mainly from the button, we want to be using bigger sizes. The optimal size is about 2.7, 3x for 50 blinds effective plus. And it helps if villains have higher relative bounty powers. So yeah, this is my default size for this example. I also find it very useful, this size, because the small blind, for example, I find him to play super honest when I make it almost 3x. People barely have any 3-bet bluffs from the small blind. Another mistake they can do, I see a lot, is whenever they 3-bet, they pick too small size because they're not really used to playing against such a big race. It's still not so common online. So once again, this puts me in a situation where I can get some edges over the population, because if they make such a small price, I get to play in position for cheap, and that's good. And I also can get away with overfolding because I know that both blinds are going to be under bluffing big time in that spot. I think I've seen like 1 out of 10 bluffs in a scenario where the blinds 3-bet me here. And I've been doing this for a while, so this is very cool. And post-flop, this is another example where this sizing is probably not going to be a thing in vanilla scenario at all. But here, because we are deep stacked and I cover him for a bounty, I'm going to be implementing some bigger sizes so I can get to his bounty more easily. So that's another adjustment. Let's have a look at this one. Oh yeah, this is not so bounty oriented. I just wanted to point out that, for example, my plan in this hand was to kind of pot control at least twice and decide what to do on the river. But this guy, who I think is a regular, but we don't play so often, he goes for this kind of bet. And what this tells me, and I think most of you will agree with me, it's pretty much always some kind of mid-strength hand, mostly a king, and sometimes maybe 8-9 of diamonds, something like that. Maybe some pocket 10s, some pocket 9s that want to get value slash protection in the same time. So be very dynamic with your ranges and with your strategies in game. That's an advice I can give you guys. I think one of the biggest leaks in population tendencies nowadays is they're trying to be playing a very static play style and kind of memorize strategies. And be ready to shift your plan and shift gears very often in game, because sometimes people, our villains, they give us enough information we can use and we can profit from it. So yeah, in this example, I'm actually planning to check fold on the river because, as I mentioned, I think he mostly has king X or some mid pair, so he doesn't really have any bluffs in this example. So this allows me to play kind of perfect against him. Right, let's have another example. So this guy was unknown to me. This was the beginning of Bounty Builder 530 on Stars. And he's not supposed to have this kind of size in a vanilla scenario. Let's agree that in a bounty scenario, he wants to bet bigger. This might be a sizing which is good in theory. I mostly think that he randomly picked his size based on his hand strength. But what I mostly wanted to talk about here is that we want to be always fast playing. We want to be fast playing our strong hands, and they, in general, our strong hands have way higher EV in bounty because of the wider ranges we are going to be up against, especially when we are the shorter stack. We want to make sure we kind of fast play all our strong hands, because then, for example, villain can stack off here with a hand like king 10 of clubs, which would be something that we very rarely see in a vanilla scenario. So yeah, in this case, it wouldn't matter because he had queens, but just wanted to point out this adjustment. This is another example where I flat with a very wide range. This is even a better example for my wide flatting range in the small blind, because here I also cover the big blind. These guys are both regulars, and I think that this is a very easy spot for me to donk, mostly because the guy who has the initiative, he's the shortest stack, and I think he's going to be playing extremely honestly here. Like, he's going to be checking back a ton of hands, maybe even some top pairs, and I don't want to let him do that, so I want to be leading. But this is kind of easy, right? I have flush draw, I have the straight draw, 1-over card, so it's not a surprise, but just wanted to point out that because I wouldn't have this kind of hand in a vanilla scenario, then I wouldn't be able to be leading this board with such a high equity hand. But right now, I'm going to have a lot of hands with very high equity on this kind of board, including a lot of two pairs, straights. Well, I only have the suited straights, but I have all the two pairs as well. So that's really changing the dynamics a lot. All right. Let's have a look in this one, at this one. So in this example, Lina, I think all of us recognize him. He's a very good regular. And in this example, we are super deep, but he still covers me by a few big blinds. So my general approach here would be to only limp. I think that's actually GTO approved as well. I don't have any raises. I only limp or fold in this example. And then I split my range in two. I have some limp calls, of course. And then based on his ISO sizing, I'm going to be going for some limp raises as well. And in theory, because he covers me and it's a bounty, he has to be isolating with a very wide value range. And if this is the case, then I can include a hand like 9-10 suited in my big limp raise strategy. So this is another something which is not very intuitive, I would say. And I just wanted to point out that we can play like this and we should play like this. And also it's very difficult to counter our strategy. If you think about it, you have 200 big blinds effective. You raise to 4x, ISO to 4x in the big blind. And then you face 16 big blind limp raise. What do you do with your entire range? Like, of course, you have some hands which are very strong and can play for stacks, but there are just a few of them. After all, you're 200 blinds effective. What I mostly point towards is that we have some hands that are very strong and they prefer to play slightly bigger pots than just limp call and play for 9 big blinds. And also we get a lot of value from his weaker raise calls. Like he's supposed to be raise calling a lot of suited connectors, suited gappers, which are lower than high. And also we get to keep the initiative. And I think this is the biggest takeaway. Initiative is very important. And also, I think in reality, we're going to be playing against much weaker ranges in that spot when they ISO and then call. Because in a sober world, I think he's supposed to be slow playing a lot of the premium hands. And I don't think this is going to happen versus real people. So I just wanted to show you this as a pre-flop example. What else we have here? Okay, so this hand is from a very soft tournament. It's a late hot 109 on stars. I think it starts at like 5 a.m. my time or something. It's crazy soft. I actually can't believe there are such games nowadays. Anyway, so this guy limps, I overlimp, and because it's bounty, I know I don't have any backdoor flush draws, but because it's a bounty, I get to play much wider ranges, kind of for value. I get to play my draws. This was a gift, actually. You don't see that every day, but I wanted to point out that my strategy here is to play my draws way more aggressively than usual. And this is what you should be doing, especially as the bigger stack. All right, and then we have a few more hands to see. This is regular from the cutoff. It's the same tournament. So once he checks back here, I think this is very capped range, and it's always pretty much always weaker top pair or a middle pair, mostly without the hearts, like tens, jacks without the heart. It might be something like king 5 suited, maybe ace 5 suited, something like that. It's also a possibility, but this is what we mostly see. So basically, because I think people are not going to be having the traps here, like the flushes, some sets or whatever, some overpairs, and also for the reason that I cover him and I want to make sure I play for his bounty, I just go straight for value with a pot bet here, and I want to jump the river as well. It's a little bit of an overbet on the river, but generally you should be very greedy when you play for value. as the bigger stack, and this is what I wanted to illustrate in this example. What do we have here? Okay, it's the same tournament. I think a little bit earlier actually. So I'm going to be flatting a lot here. I think also the button has to be overcalling a lot, but still realizing how many stronger top pairs I have in that spot, I actually decided to check back here because I don't think I have a hand weaker than 10-7 suited, for example. So this is one of my weakest possible top pairs. And also in this example, it's kind of good that I have the 8 kicker because when an 8 shows up, it's very likely that the big blind feels comfortable with his 8 or feels good about bluffing because it's not very likely me or the hijack had the 8. So yeah, in this example, it's actually pretty interesting to see what the hijack plays like that. I bluff catch him here, but he had king jack of diamonds, and he's actually one of the guys from Montenegro. So you probably are aware at this time, but they are trying to always exploit population tendencies. So basically when I check back here, he instantly assumes that it doesn't matter what he has because my range is capped, which might be true, but I can still have some top pairs. He probably wasn't thinking that. I wanted to point out here that if you're in the hijack shoes and you have such hand, it could be fine to actually go for this bold play because most players, they won't really have such strong hands in this example. We can probably agree that the river is not the best card because I can still have 8-9, I can still have 7-6, maybe 4-5. But whatever, I just wanted to point out that his play is not as crazy as it seems initially. All right, so in this example, this could be a spot where this hand is a mixing in some checkbacks because it's not strong enough. It's one of our weakest aces here, no backdoors. We face the small blind range, which is not so weak. And also the small blind in this example, in theory, he's supposed to be trapping a lot because of the short stack in the big blind. So I think that this guy might be capable of doing that. I'm not sure. And also, I wanted to talk about the turn. Like this turn could be played as check back in theory most of the times. But here, because I had info about the guy in the big blind, he was like a really bad whale or something. He was super splashy, and I went for the half pot to make sure that he doesn't fold a hand like Jack 7 or Queen Jack or King 10 or something. He's not folding a pair with a flush draw, of course, even if I jump, but I wanted to make sure he goes with these weaker hands. And in this example, it was another gift, but yeah, this is how we adjust our ranges like post flop. Instead of checking on the turn, I want to be mostly betting this type of hand to make sure I play for stacks, even though my equity against his range is not so great. If I calculate the chips that he adds to the middle, if I play for his bounty, then my equity improves a lot, so I can expand my value range. Let's put it that way. What else we have here? Yeah, this is not really a bounty hand. I just included it as a bonus if we have extra time. But the thing is pretty similar to what I mentioned earlier about the ace deuce of spades hand. When you have some plan, for example, to check call here initially was my plan. And when villain gives me information, I want to switch gears, I want to change my plan. I still think my hand is not strong enough to check raise here. But what I can do, because I think he already tells me I have ace-6 or I have pocket 7s or I have something like 10-8 or I have ace-5 maybe. If I know that he has one of those hands, I can simply just lead on the river, hope to get a call. And this is what happens. Like in the games nowadays, we should try to maximize our EV. Basically, like hand by hand, we shouldn't try to be balanced. I'm not sure if you have made any research, guys, but from what I've seen, the biggest winners online nowadays are guys who are not afraid to be exploiting, not afraid to be utilizing the information they're given to adjust their strategies in game and switch gears all the time. From my experience, the biggest crushers online just do that all the time. So don't be afraid to feel stupid sometimes. So just take the line which is the most profitable right now. Okay, this is one of the last hands I have. This is a very good example about how we want to be inducing in bounties compared to vanilla. Like in a vanilla, this is the easiest jam in the world. We probably never 4-bet for this type of stacks in a vanilla, but in a bounty, we always want to 4-bet here, no win, because we want to make sure, even if it's just a few percentages more often, that he's going to be calling our 4-bet compared to if we jump. We still want to make sure we keep him in the hand, we don't make him fold. So that's a really good adjustment. Let's see if I have another one. Yeah, this is not so interesting hand. First hand in the same soft 109 on stars. I just don't know this guy, but when he limps, I'm assuming he's like a pretty bad player, and I decided to go for value here. When he min raises me here, I think two things in game. One of them is, okay, this guy probably has and plays like this some of his sets. And the second thing is, I don't think he has many bluffs like this. I've seen some occasional 9-10 suited. I've seen some pocket fours, pocket fives, which are not really bluffs. But I also think he has a lot of top pairs, which are weaker than mine. So my play at this point was to re-raise. And if he raises me back, then I actually get this info I'm looking for. Because there are two options. He either calls or he re-raises. And if he calls, I know I have the best hand very often. Because he might have something like 9-10 suited that I explained, or maybe something like, I don't know, 6-4, 6-5, maybe ace-4, ace-5, or a weaker 7. So when he just calls, I feel very good about my hand. And if it was like a more wet card on the turn, bringing some more draws, yeah, if it was some more action card, let's put it that way, I was gonna be betting myself. But since it's the 3, all of his draws missed, it's very unlikely he has a set right now, or he has me beat. So I wanted to let him bet, and yeah, my plan worked this time. Let's see if I have anything else to show you. Oh yeah, this is a very interesting example. So this guy on the small blind is a regular. And at first you might think that it's a bad play to flat here with 7.5 big blinds behind, but actually that's not true. I can show you real quickly what his strategy should be looking like. This wasn't a final table, so I'm gonna search for a spot which is similar to that one. I think it's, yeah, this one. So the small blind here has 11 big blinds. 1 second. And he faces a raise from the low jack. In this example, when most people have 11 big blinds, they try to very rarely flat, and they mostly play jam or fold, which is fine for vanillas for the most part. But actually in bounty, you can see how substantial flatting range we're supposed to have, especially when there is no ICM involved. So in this case, this guy has 11 big blinds. He's supposed to be calling almost 10% of his range and jamming only 14.5%. And this is a combination between him having less fold equity and also being up against wider ranges, and also being able to over realize his equity because he has less fold equity post flop. So whenever he has some kind of equity post flop, whether it's like a pair with a draw or just a pair, he gets to be paid more often by weaker holdings because of his short stack. So this becomes very important in bounty tournaments. I think this is a topic that hasn't been discussed before by me, or I haven't really seen anyone talk about it online. So yes, you can flat the small blind much wider, than you might think when you're short in small blind versus someone who covers you in a bounty. So yeah, let's see if I have another example. In this case, we check back. I actually decided to check because I don't think I accomplish much by betting this hand. I just make him fold some dominated hands, weaker kings or queens, and I probably don't make him fold anything stronger. So I didn't feel like I need to bet. Okay, this is a ICM example. Here, I think we were 30 left or something. This is the daily cooldown, 109 on stars. So at this stage, in a vanilla scenario, GTO sizing would be just a quarter with our entire range. But because it's a PKO and I cover him, I go for a half pot bet. This might look like a very small adjustment, but it's actually going to add up big time for the later streets. If he check calls here, a quarter compared to half pot, this might be the difference between me winning his whole stack or just some part of it. So yeah, and this is one of the last hands I wanted to talk about. In this case, we're not very used to overcalling such hands, but I think here is kind of mandatory. First of all, the stacks are so short that I'm not like risking to lose action post flop from someone who might have a strong hand here, because when the stacks are short, the ranges, the get it in ranges are much wider post flop. So if somebody flops top pair or something or an over pair, I can still stack him. This is not the issue, but the main thing here is that both blinds, they might decide it's a very good spot with over 8 big blinds in the middle. They want to go for it. And especially the small blind, like he's so short, he kind of has to go for this spot with a very wide range. I do think population probably doesn't jump as much as they should be in the small blind shoes, but still, I think it's a very good spot to overcall your aces. And also, I think we should play the same way kings and mostly queens, especially if the big blind covers us and is kind of aggressive player. Okay, so this is another exploit. The small blind is very aggressive. I don't want to overlimp, and this is not a hand that I want to overlimp in general. And this guy who limps is a complete random guy to me. First time I play with him. This is pretty far away from what I would be ISOing here under normal conditions, but because I don't know him and I suspect that his range is pretty weak and he's gonna be playing very poorly post flop, I decided to ISO myself against him. And yeah, here I don't go for my standard quarter, but I go a little bit bigger because of his short stack. And I was right that this guy plays very poorly post flop, and my exploit worked pretty well this time. What else do we have here? Okay, this might be not so interesting, but in this case, as I said earlier, I want to be playing more aggressive my draws and also my value hands. So I'm always check raising this kind of hand, and also I'm using the big size. And when I use the big size, I think he's gonna be pretty honest with his range. Like I don't think when a diamond comes, he's gonna be having many flushes. So seeing a diamond on the turn is like a green light for me. I can definitely go bet here and jump on the river. And this was the last hand I wanted to show you guys. So it's time for questions, if you have any. Yeah, I think it was a pretty good length for the webinar. I'm going to be keeping an eye on the Zoom chat as well, but it's best if you ask your questions in the Discord channel. So overall, I want to conclude with in bounties, if we rate what we saw in these 4 webinars as like let's say 20 steps to take to become like the best player in PKOs. I think on average population nowadays, the regulars, they take like 3 to 4 of these steps on average. So you don't need to be perfect. You only need to be taking like at least 5 of these 20 steps to become better. and then you're going to be killing the competition. So that's something that you should be keeping in mind, that after all, we play versus people for the most part. There are some RTA online, of course, but this should be as concerning. And if we play mostly against people, then we can play better than them, and this should be enough. We don't need to be perfect. So I have a lot of students who, when they hear all this information, they're like, oh man, I've been playing so differently. Do I beat the games? Am I like a bad player or something? And I always want to mention this because it's very important. You just have to be better than the competition, nothing else. We have a question. As a short stack, let's say 10 big blinds, how much tighter you open jam when you have a bounty? First of all, I think it depends what the stage is and how relevant your bounty is, because you might have a bounty, a starting bounty, but if it's like late stages of tournament, it's worth like a few antes. And if you think the players are aware of this, and if you think they would play as they would play in a vanilla tournament, then you should play close ranges to vanilla ranges. But in most cases, I think I talked about this in the first webinar, I generally try to open jam less suited connectors, especially low ones, and less lowest pocket pairs like deuces and threes generally are not so great when you're short and you're covered by everyone. And also like the suited connectors, they lose their value, and respectively the offsuit and suited high cards, they get more value. So usually about maybe 20% tighter, but it depends a lot. We have another question. You said that we fast play with top hands in PKO, but you checked one time with ace queen on queen high board. I assume, like you said, it's just part of the constant different strategy. Well, it was actually, I think, it was a 3-bet pot, so I was kind of defending, and I didn't want to take the initiative. I think this is the hand. I don't have a donking range here because the board is not good for my range at all. But I was going to check raise if he bet. So I think this was the hand you're referring to. We have another question. In part 1 or 2, I mentioned blind versus blind. Small blind limps, big blind ISO raises 7.5 big blinds when he covers the small blind. What effective stack is this? Is this what you meant? Yes, I meant that the optimal size is about 7 big blinds. And this is for 50 blinds effective when the big blind is the bigger stack. And of course, when we include some ICM into all this, it becomes a little bit less attractive to put so many blinds in the middle preflop, but also you very rarely play for 50 plus effective in deep stages of bounties. So yeah. And in general, we should be trying to ISO bigger, both for raise first in the small blind when we cover, and ISO size from the big blind when we cover facing a lip. Both these cases, we should be sticking to bigger sizes compared to vanilla. All right, looks like people are happy with the content so far. Okay, let's see 1-2 more minutes of questions and we'll call it a day. The difference between what I was trying to, this is the last part of the webinars. This is actually not supposed to be held, like the part 4 is extra. It's because of a lot of interest, and also because some of the topics were untaught in the previous 3 webinars. And I'm a bit of a perfectionist myself, so I kind of asked for another chance to explain myself. So yeah. Okay, I don't want to end this series. Possible to continue with you, maybe coaching. Yeah, yes, guys, I do also offer private coaching and also group coaching. So you can reach me on my Discord in a private message and we can talk this through. I actually have a few of the guys I see in the chat who contacted me for coaching already, and we have started the process with some of them, which is great. Yeah, sure, why not? If we get 2K subscribers on YouTube, maybe we can ask Alex for one more. Sure, I actually enjoy big time talking about PKOs. It's one of my favorite poker formats, and it's very challenging because you constantly have to think about so many factors in game. It's definitely not like a robotic playstyle, as most of the other MTTs are. All right, guys, I hope you enjoyed this at least as much as I did today, and talk to you at some later point. Bye-bye.
Recording